Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today is returning guest Chris P. James of the Burrito Brothers, and I'm super excited to have him back on the show. Last time he was here to talk about their Christmas album, and this time they're here to talk about their newest album called Together. Chris plays keyboards, guitar, harmonica, and also writes songs for them, so he's multi-talented, and I'm just excited about this new album. And welcome back on the show.
Well, thank you, Tammy. It's really nice to talk to you again, and I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. So again, new album just recently came out. Obviously, it's different than the Christmas one, of course. So,
well, yeah.
So what was it like to just go back and coming off of your Christmas album and just dig right back into you guys' roots again?
Well, it's actually not quite. It didn't really work that way. It was they overlapped the two albums. We were working on this Together album as far back as the pandemic, 2020, along in there, maybe a little after that, 21. We had started getting all our ideas for it was to be the next album we make after the one called The Notorious Burrito Brothers. And we just kind of got delayed by the pandemic and the fact that our guitar player, Bob Hatter, contracted cancer and in fact died during the process. And it was very sad, and we dedicated the album to him. It just took a while to get off the ground. And while that was sort of slowly moving along, I got the idea that wouldn't it be cool to make a Christmas album? So we sort of put a hold on this thing, even though it was mostly done, if not all done, I think, and asked the record company, if it was SFM Records in England, if it was okay with them if we waited on this until 2024 to promote it, because we really wanted to do that Christmas album. Just a different sort of thing that there's never been a Burrito Brothers Christmas album. The fact that we're always kind of struggling, for lack of a better word, with not having as much universal attention as we wish. We kind of seem to be slightly under the radar for most people. Thought maybe the Christmas album had a chance of being something different and charming enough, and it kind of did, I think. So that explains why this one actually, in a way, precedes the Christmas album, although now it's finally getting unearthed, unveiled. And when you said a whole different kind of thing, it struck me that it isn't exactly. I think that when we went about making the Christmas album, we were still in the same swing of things that we were making this. We did it in the same studios. We finished this new album together with a guy named Steve Allen, who played guitar, and like Bob Hatter before him, also played the bass in the studio sessions. And he came in saying that he'd do it if he got Bob's blessing, if Bob was okay with it, because it kind of seemed like it was Bob's baby. We already had all the songs decided and written, and Bob was co-writer on well over half. I've always said it's the very same album we would have made had Bob lived. So Steve Allen came in and kind of sat in for Bob, kind of filled in what Bob was incapable of completing due to his condition. But then when we paused and did the Christmas album, Steve Allen took that role the whole way through. So we kind of it all sort of folded together a little bit. This album and the Christmas album all kind of seem like part of the same process, the same year that we did sessions in the same studios with the same guys. And we also felt with that Christmas album that we were just making another Burrito Brothers album. We weren't really finding old chestnuts and doing that. We were writing whole new material and doing it in our way, and creating another album. So they're almost partner albums, I would say. And I'm glad that we now have gotten around to pitching the Together album, because it would be a super shame if it was just left behind. It's too good to be forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a chance to listen to it, not all the way through yet, but do you have like a favorite song on there
Oh,
or
yes.
anything like that?
Oh, yes, I definitely do. It's interesting how I get asked that, because in the past, I've always tended to say, I just like the whole album. I like the whole thing as an excursion, as a little cohesive piece of art. But in this case, I have to say that the second to last piece on the album, the I Live for Loving You, is my favorite song. And the reason is that I've long wished that I've always admired the true classic standard type, the kind of song that becomes a timeless standard that, every good singer could sing, the kind that Frank Sinatra sang or something, and that's the ideal I was chasing with that song, just a really sweet, super melodic, soulful love tune. I live for loving you. And I was envisioning and dreaming that maybe it could wind up in a movie, or movies, or get covered by people who sing very well, that kind of thing. I have high wishes and hopes for it. I don't know if I'm going to get to see those come true, but that's how I regard that song. So it stands out for me. Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, and I love that you're not afraid to just write whatever you feel like, and explore different avenues and sort of like bend the genre that you're in. Like you don't stick to your genre, you just follow the creative path.
I love that you chose those words, because that's the very way I put it. I feel like I'm on this path. You just sort of keep your eyes and ears and heart open and see what life is presenting to try next, and who to do it with, and just be thankful. Like I alluded to the group not being super famous, being kind of under the radar. And of course, I would love to get more recognition, more recognized. But I also count my blessings and think you could do a lot worse than the position I'm in here in the world. I get to make these albums with world-class, marvelous musicians, and meet people like you and talk about it, and feel it's rewarding. It's a nice thing, It's the kind of thing that not being the biggest superstar in the world doesn't mean a total failure or loss. It's like,
Hmm.
in fact, sometimes I wonder if it's just insane for some of the people who are mega stars, so maybe it's not so bad. I don't know. I certainly don't want to sound like I'm have no interest in getting a little more fame and fortune, but I'm also very thankful for what I have.
Yeah, of course, of course. And no matter who you impact, whether it's, 5 people or 5 million people, you're still making an impact. You're still able to have that creative outlet and do what you love for a living, which is not
Exactly.
something people can say very often.
Oh, I agree. Exactly. That's why I think I should count my blessings, because it really is something. It's pretty special. There's a record company in England that's distributing the music we make around the world, and we're getting attention for it. And also, the thing I really dig about making albums is that that's a document. That's a little piece of art that you get to leave. It's something to show for the talent. Not to say that playing live isn't also super gratifying, because you get that feeling, that spirit. But the idea of creating that little work of art is a cohesive work. When you feel that you did a good job, it's something pretty special. It's like it's out there in the world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. The last time you were on my show, we talked a little bit about some of your musical influences and also about how, well, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how much we dug into it, but like how some of the artists from the 70s and 60s are coming out with new music, Rolling Stones and Paul McCartney and Billy Joel recently with his new song. I'm just curious, what do you think about that as another person in the industry?
I'm all for, especially as I'm starting to get a lot older, I'm all for people still carrying on if they're capable of it. If they've still got some goods to deliver, of course, yeah, it's beautiful. It's a precious gift that should be shared and used as you can. And I'm from the older point of view that those were my favorite artists, the people from that era. I grew up thinking, actually, I still think that nobody's better than the Beatles. The Beatles paved the way for everyone. And I saw that as a little child. And then really my adulthood started in the 70s. But just enough. I mean, I've noticed there's people, I've had kids at a jam camp. I was one of the teachers, if you call it that, instructors. I've done some summers ago a few times. Kids like 10 years old, 11 or 12, who are smarter and sharper than old people might realize until they come in contact with them. Point I'm making with that is that, when I was 8, 9, 10, and I knew who the Beatles were. Maybe I couldn't dissect it and emulate it yet, but it hit me. It was in my frame of reference, and I feel like that was a Renaissance era. There were so many brilliant artists, the time of geniuses, and it had something to do with before the music business got quite so corporate and profit oriented. That although I know it always was profit oriented, but they seem to just find talented musicians as opposed to people buying their way in and all that stuff that transpired later. And also the electronics, I have mixed feelings about how much good that did. I love early Moog experiments. I'm not against electronic keyboards and things, but I regard that golden age as kind of waning. Not that it's ever gone completely away. I strongly feel that you can always find good music. There's never been a so-called era, a decade, the 90s or whatever, the aughts or the teens that didn't have any music I liked. I always find plenty of music I like. But I do think that in the 60s and at least most of the 70s, I tended to like most all of it. I mean, it was a much larger percentage of stuff that really appealed to like an older guy. That still does. I think that's just inevitable. People just do that. It's human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely true. We sort of find music in a certain era of our life, and even though we're open to other types of music, other artists, other genres, I think often it's a comfort to come back to a certain couple of decades in one's life, or even just a few years in one's life sometimes.
Well, that period I alluded to was so rich that this is not a case of me just going back all the time and listening to the same music. It's more a case of continually finding it unfolds more and more. That's what I meant by thinking almost everybody was good back then. You go into the jazz world, Miles Davis and John Coltrane and those people, even the classical world, the R&B, the soul, the blues, the rock, the country, and golly, in the world of rock, I keep finding bands that I hadn't heard because they weren't quite so famous. And for fans like me, these record companies will dig up artifacts. They'll dig up concerts or leftover material or unreleased albums. It's like you can keep finding, quote, new, unquote, music from back then. It's amazing. Although I digress, don't I? We're not talking about the Burrito Brothers now.
That's okay. It's important to know how you're influenced as a musician, because it does, I think, in a way, seep in even subconsciously into what.
Oh, of course it does. Yeah, absolutely does. Yeah.
I was curious, like, you've got this album and you've got several other albums out. Are you guys already thinking about the next album, or are you just sort of having a chance to relax and enjoy the fruits of this album?
A cross between both ideas. We're not in a big hurry right now, especially since I'm trying to promote the album like I'm doing right here, right now. And it seems like that's a focus worth maintaining for a little while, although we've already talked a little bit about what we want to record next. And we always want to. We're always interested in it. There's no shortage of material. I've been making recordings, and a lot of them are pretty presentable for my whole adult life. It's always been my main interest, and so many of them until I got in the Burrito Brothers, or even a little, probably going back about 20 years before I really had a good outlet where I was in a group that was signed to a label that was making records. And so back working with my brothers and people I knew in college and people I met when I first came to Nashville, or even the first 15, 20 years of Nashville, there was a lot of songwriting demos and attempts at pitching an album that didn't get picked up. And I just really got a wealth of archival material from my life. And I go through that, some song from 30 years ago will hit me and I'll think, we could rework that. Especially if I wrote it alone, I can take it to the other guys and say, why don't we work with this as a starting point and create a new song from it? It's just neat to have some ammunition instead of guys sitting around in a room going, well, what do you think? What do you, anybody got an idea? It's kind of neat to really have one that's pretty well laid out that you can just take from there. And in fact, we most definitely did that on this Together album. I have compiled a disc 2 we called Together Deluxe. We've got a new 2-disc version of Together that's available on our website, the burritobrothers.net. And the second disc is like the demos and some live things and outtakes of what went into making the album. It's definitely not a double album. It's a single album together with the bonus disc that's just kind of a peek behind the scenes. Like, for instance, I mentioned I Live for Loving You. I first started the main idea of that song 30 years ago and have a decent recording of it. It's not quite the same song, but you can certainly compare it and tell the similarity. So that's one of the bonus tracks on disc 2 of Together Deluxe. That's kind of become predominantly my approach toward work. I wouldn't say there's no completely new songs written. Since I've written them all my life, ideas still pop up and I'll come up with it. And in fact, the other guys in the band often we get together and we come up with stuff from scratch, but we also fix up these ones that go way back.
Yeah. If you're feeling stressed, burnt out, or having compassion fatigue, there are resources available to you. Dr. Ani Kunimura runs the Self-Care Institute, and she currently has openings for the wildly popular Resilience Over Burnout, a self-care course. It is 31 continuing education credits, and you can enroll now until April 25th. Additionally, she offers other courses and resources on her website. Please visit selfcareinstitute.com for more information. Yeah, and I love, and we talked about it a little bit last time because you talked about how you had a Christmas song that you'd sort of reworked, that you'd written a long time ago. And I love that you don't just completely throw ideas out. I love that you are open to exploring what an idea could become.
Yeah, well, they're usually pretty good demos, if I say so myself. But and so it's neat to take something that's a pretty solid idea and examine it and think, this could be better right here. This is a better line here. What if we went here it's pretty cool. It's like, I think the level of the group's musicianship and expertise in the studio now is so high that we can take some demo that was not really fully realized and know how to fully realize it.
Is there anything musically or compositionally that you haven't done that you might want to explore in the future?
Hmm, it's an interesting idea. Strangely, I have a little interest. I have some interest in really weird stuff, but it's so overweighed by these kind of albums. This Together album is so me. It's really how I want to present myself to the world, and the best music I could possibly make. But for example, I got a long ago, really, I got a little mini Moog synthesizer, the original ones with all the dials and the switches and stuff, and you make sound, and stuff. And and I've just put my little home studio recorder on and recorded for about 15 minutes, just making whatever sounds hit my ears. And sometimes they were riffs, sometimes they were almost just sound effects. And then went back and did another one over it, so they interacted with each other. Strangely, I've listened to that a few times and enjoyed it. It's like, that's pretty weird. I don't think I'm ready to try to pitch that as a new album. And then the first thing that popped into my head when you said something altogether different was this love I have for Miles Davis. My
Mm.
father was a trumpet player, and his number one guy was Miles Davis. And he could really, my father played similarly in that he knew how to make the trumpet not such a bright, over bright, harsh instrument. He knew how to cool it out, how to make it sweet. And he liked muting, and he liked flugelhorn, what the fatter,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so things like In a Silent Way or Sketches of Spain or Bitches Brew, they appeal to me very, very much. And with my father, and on a couple other occasions with other people, I've played what we felt was along those lines of music. And so that thought is appealing too. But there again, it's kind of a stretch for me to suddenly think I could be a jazz artist or something. I don't know. but these kind of things, yes, definitely different music does appeal to me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, along those lines, I put forth the example of Beyonce's newest albums where it's a country album, but she also sings opera, and but she, was well known in the pop and R&B fields. It's just a great example of how a person can just explore the different types of music that they want to create and cover, or in different genres that they can be in, and just have wild success at it. So you never know. I mean, there could be
Uh,
a jazz album in your future.
well, maybe so. Maybe just I would think of it as a sideline. I would think of it as just doing something for the love of it, for fun. Because actually, we've already presented that idea in the burritos, not to such an extreme amount of change differentiation, but we've made available on our website series of albums we call sidelines. Well, actually, it's not quite a series. So far, two have been released, and I have the third one ready to go. And they're comprised of the best recordings that I have in my library through my life of stuff that was recorded with people who were in the Burrito Brothers, or who later, some part of some of the guys who are in the Burrito Brothers now came in after my tenure, because I started having more influence. I'm the band leader, so
Mhm.
I have to do with who gets into the band. In the bigger picture, when you look at the timeline of who's been in the Burritos, I've got recordings from years ago where some of these guys who now qualify as Burrito Brothers were in it. And I've also got recordings from years ago where I got lucky enough to play with guys who were in the Burrito Brothers. I've been kind of hovering around this band for a long time, and that's why I finally was the guy to get offered the job in 2009. These are like pretty much burrito recordings, but they're not really, they're not a specific album. They're just a hodgepodge. They're collecting various tracks that fit that description and call it sidelines. So sidelines could maybe stretch even further.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, it's I
Well,
feel yeah, sky's the limit. It's whatever you really want to do.
well, I know that Tony Paoletta, our pedal steel guitar player, is so broad in his perspective of music. He's absolutely brilliant. He's world class. And so he's not limited to, people think of pedal steel as a country music instrument, but he doesn't. He plays it just as a musical instrument. And I know he's a huge fan of Miles Davis and John Coltrane and just a broad spectrum of music, like a really well-rounded musician ought to be. And,
Hmm.
and then I could even see the other two guys, Peter Young, the drummer. He's so capable and dexterous that he'd get into that. In fact, last thing he did, he plays so many gigs with so many people. He told me he did a thing with Kenny Gradney from Little Feat, and that's got to be kind of New Orleans funky. That's a different kind of thing. He's broad in his understanding, and so is Steve Allen. These guys, I'm so lucky to get to play with musicians of this caliber. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I always love talking to you because you have such a passion for what you do, and you talked about how it's a blessing that people don't always have the opportunity to do what they love, and it's just great. Like I said, love the new album. Can't wait to finish listening to it all the way. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the listeners about the Burrito Brothers or your album before I let you go today?
Well, let's see. Uh, it's funny, we got so relaxed and just had a beautiful conversation that it wasn't real promo-y. So, so I'll try to say the couple things I'm usually trying to promo us with. That there's a timeline on our website, and that's really neat because we run up against people kind of not understanding that the Burrito Brothers are still going, or thinking that we are sort of imposters to be doing it all these years later. And all you got to do is look at this timeline and see how each year it gives, every year since 1968, an entry for each year, that who was in the band, what album was released, and how it transpired that people came and went, came and went, came and went. There was no real point where there wasn't the Burrito Brothers.
Hmm.
Each time when somebody who was in for a while left, or God forbid died, the next guy comes in. And it's really interesting to note that there's never been an audition. It's always the next guy is known. It's like, well, we know who to get now. And I believe I was one of those guys. And so that timeline is really special. It kind of legitimizes or makes comprehensible the fact that the group is still going and never hasn't been. And in fact, there's a wonderful quote from Graham Parsons where he says, "The idea will keep going whether I do it or anyone else does it. It's got to keep going." And it has.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you'd be really, really proud because like you said, you had released that Christmas album and now you've got Together. So, like you're always expanding the horizons and you're not letting anything get in the way of the music making.
No, that's true. We've been lucky about that. I think the only thing that could get in the way is what happened to Bob Hatter. It's like
Mm.
if I had some physical problem where I couldn't do it, then that could get in the way. I sure hope before my time is over that I can recognize and bring into the fold the people who could carry it on past me, because that quote I just alluded to of Graham Parsons, where it's got to keep going whether I do it or anyone else, I think applies to me just as much. I think that it's not about me and finishing up with me. I hope it doesn't. I love the idea of the group continuing.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like Doctor Who. There's always a next reincarnation, and it's like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
longest running show.
yeah. And each time that the Burrito Brothers reconstitute, it's always very cool. It's always very interesting because there's no laurels to rest upon. It's more a case of, I believe in this whole legacy. I love the idea of carrying on this work, this body of work. So you assert yourself. You show each new incarnation is out to prove that they're the right guys to carry it on. And you can hear that in it. It's like it keeps staying very vital. It's not tired and old at all. And it's certainly not a bunch of Johnny come latelys playing the old hits, because there really aren't hits. There's some well-known songs in the history, but that's one of the reasons the Burrito Brothers stay kind of under most people's radars, because they're not all over the radio. They did not have mega hits. They just made really well-received albums, a lot of really good album reviews. And in fact, another thing about the 70s was that was considered the album era. So that sort of established the template.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show again. Listeners, please check the show notes. And depending on when you're listening to this, you could order or pre-order their newest album, Together, from the Store for Music Records label. So thank you again, Chris, for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Tammy. My pleasure. And it was a treat and an honor. It's very nice of you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Listeners, again, check out those artists and just keep supporting people. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.